right, book of Genesis, chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39. It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? Yes. And I mean, we've gone back. We've covered about 13 chapters in the book of Genesis, and it's been a rough road at times. We've been disappointed at times as we have watched the saints fall, blunder, make mistakes. I'm really grateful for Joseph. Got off to a bit of a rocky start. Kind of thought he was all of that. You know, God gave him a couple of dreams. His father picked him out as a favorite and made him an incredible robe that made him stand out above the others. And he was certainly humbled, and now we're going to see a different Joseph as we come to chapter 39. Let's look at the first 6 verses. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. This is a reminder to us. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household. He entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, Potiphar did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. That's a rough life, isn't it? Just had to worry about where the next meal was coming from, knowing it was going to be a good one. So, isn't that refreshing? So what catches your attention right off the bat with these 6 verses?
God favored him.
God favored him. Man, if we don't see that, we aren't reading clearly. All right? I mean, the author wants to leave no doubt whatsoever what was happening here. When you look, he starts by saying the Lord was with Joseph. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord gave Joseph success in everything he did. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian, Potiphar. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had because of Joseph. I mean, 5, 6 times in those 6 verses, we are told very clearly God's blessing was on Joseph. And if you go back, God has let Joseph know that from the get-go, right? He's let him know that with the dreams that he had. His hand has been upon him. But this is a different Joseph. This is a Joseph that's grown up. This is a Joseph that's matured, who found himself by himself. Remember when they stuck him in the cistern and then sold him to the Ishmaelites? Where was he going to turn? He turned to the Lord. He turned to the one place that he knew had his hand upon him. And I think God had his attention all that time in a very clear way. And as he was sold to Potiphar, Joseph continued to see the hand of the Lord upon him. Do you remember, does it strike you in any way that when you read that Potiphar saw the Lord's blessing on Joseph, and because he saw the Lord's blessing on Joseph, he raised Joseph up and kept giving him more and more responsibility because he saw the Lord's blessing on Joseph. Does it remind you of anything that we've read about?
Laban and Jacob.
Yeah. Laban was richly blessed because of Jacob's presence. And you see that along the way. And it's interesting. Here's somebody that didn't believe in the one true living God, and yet he saw somebody had his hand on Joseph, and he ought to tap into that. And he did. Anything else strike you in these first 6 verses? The drama hasn't started yet, but anything catch your attention other than what we've talked about?
You're not supposed to say they lived happily ever after him. This was the end of the story.
You like to stop it right there, and things went really well, right?
It's all good.
Well, it's headed that way. It's just gonna take a while, isn't it? Well, let's pick up in the middle of verse 6. Now Joseph was well built and handsome.
He didn't even need his coat.
He didn't need his coat. Well, I think he lost his coat a while back, didn't he? Yep. And after a while, verse 7, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said very boldly, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. He told her, "With me in charge, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Now she's on a mission. And the mission is to get Joseph to sleep with her. What do you make of Joseph's response?
Admirable.
Admirable. What else do you make of Joseph's response?
Can I ask a question? At this time, did Joseph have a wife?
We are not told. I don't think he does. There's nothing that indicates he does. He really probably hasn't had an opportunity in all of this.
He's respectful.
He's respectful. He sure was. How he handled that rather diplomatically. He gave a good explanation there.
He's given glory to God too, because it says he said he didn't want to sin against God.
Yes.
He didn't talk about how it would reflect on Potiphar.
He recognized God's blessing on his life. He recognized who it was that put him in the position he's in. And he realized he could blow it just like that. And he didn't, right? He realized if I sin, if I do, and I can't help but think, because of the way the story's told, that there could have been a draw there. It wasn't like, I don't think he was repulsed by her. I think there was something there that if he had not been close to the Lord, he would have done what everybody else had done up to this point.
Well, I thought it was interesting that he said, "No one is greater in this house than me," which, I think she would have been jealous of that. Just like his brothers were greater than when he bragged about.
Yeah, he might have thought she might not have liked that too
Yeah,
well. Huh?
yeah.
It's a stark contrast. Everything we've been reading up to this point, isn't it? We just read about Judah, right? We remember Simeon and Levi going in and killing all the Shechemites. We remember Reuben going in and sleeping with Bilhah, his father's concubine. This is radically contrast to the other brothers,
One of them
to his
finally got
father.
it.
What's that?
One of them finally got it. Finally figured it
Somebody
out.
finally is catching on here, right?
Mhm.
Somebody's catching on.
This wasn't a one-time offer. I mean,
This was a continual thing. Continual thing. Now, let me just plant a question in your mind, not that you have to answer it right now, but think about it. Do you think Potiphar was oblivious to this?
No.
Just think about it as we go along. So as we're watching this, I want you to look for something else. I want you to look at what we learn here about dealing with temptation. What we learn about dealing with the lure to go off track. Which, up to this point, it seems like when the lure came along, every one of Jacob and his sons bit the lure and were caught in sin. So I want you to keep watching here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to read down through this. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak, speaking of Potiphar's wife, and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the door. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and run out of the door of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and he ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told this story. "That Hebrew slave that you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now let's just hold it right there.
Now, going back to the question that you asked, if you thought Potiphar knew that something was going on, I think if he'd have known, he would have put Joseph someplace where he wasn't in direct contact with her.
That's a good thought.
Put him to death.
It's a good thought. That he wouldn't have let this continue to be a possibility if he
I mean,
knew.
that's just making a fool out of himself.
Were you going to say something?
I just wondered if any other translations had something besides "make sport of me."
Which verse is that?
It says it twice, but it's in verse
17.
17. It's in 14 also.
14 and 17. Anybody else have a different translation other than "make sport of me"?
To fool around with me.
To fool around with me.
Fool around, make fun of.
Make fun of me.
Mock us.
Mock. That word might be a little stronger. You're thinking.
I mean, I just think she would have said something besides "make fun of me."
Right. Or make sport of me.
Yeah.
He came on to me.
A little strong. A little bit. You thought it might be a little stronger.
Yeah,
This version
but
says
she did say he wanted to sleep with me.
Mm-hmm.
tried to rape her.
Oh, what version is that?
Is good news.
Okay. Tried to rape her, which certainly is what she's saying. I mean, that's the point she's trying to make.
Pastor,
Mm-hmm.
I think Potiphar's kind of aware of his wife's activities in this realm because I believe he'd have put Joseph to death if he'd have thought that's exactly what happened. And that's what happened to Hamar, and
Mhm.
Esther.
That's
Put him in a prison. It really wasn't that bad of a prison.
Yeah, that's a really insightful notation.
Well, if he still thought Joseph was being blessed by God, I guess he probably he didn't want to do anything like kill him.
And that's an interesting thought too.
Yeah.
Because
Go ahead.
wasn't Potiphar the captain of the executioners?
Well, in some of the translations, it refers to him as the captain of the prison, the guard. Yeah. Well, let me just ask you this question. When it says that Potiphar burned with anger, where was that anger aimed?
And his wife. I think it was aimed at his wife.
You think it was at his wife?
And he knew he had a good thing going with Joseph is taking care of everything, and now he was gonna have to do something about it or lose face.
He's losing a good deal here, isn't he? He's got to deal with it, right, or he'll lose face, which in Middle Eastern culture is extremely important.
Why did you think Joseph didn't go to Potiphar when she started making these advances and say,
You're raising the question, why didn't Joseph go to him?
why didn't you go to Potiphar and say, well,
Yeah. Just want you to know.
I just want you to know your wife's been,
That's a good question. My guess is he was a little leery of doing that
yeah.
because of the possible response. I really, honestly, until today, had not given a whole lot of thought. Every time I read all these years, Potiphar burned with anger, my first thought was, well, he was so ticked with Joseph. He was ready to wring him by his neck. And I was reading one of the particular commentaries I was looking at is the only one I've ever found that raised the question. Matter of fact, he tended to think what you were saying, that that Potiphar's anger was as much as anything burning toward his wife because he knew the reputation. She had had a reputation. This isn't the first time this has happened. Now, we aren't told that. He's reading between the lines. But the point that he makes is the same point Bill's making, that if he really believed that Joseph tried to rape his wife, he would have had him put to death immediately, right then. I thought he raised a really good question. I mean, we don't really know the answer, but I thought he raised a really good question.
I think that brings up the subject of, like you said, we don't know that she'd ever
We don't.
messed around with anybody before.
We don't.
So I don't think he would have been suspicious of that. That's another thing, like with Joseph, because knowing he was a good-looking man and that sort of thing, if that was her history, then definitely I think he would have kept him away.
That's a good point, Jane. As with a lot of biblical stories, especially Old Testament, there's a lot of details we aren't told. And we're trying to sort and, put things together. But it makes you think.
I think he saved face by getting mad at his wife, but not letting anybody know he was angry with her. He didn't want anybody to know.
Well,
He knew
his actions showed everybody else his anger was toward Joseph.
That's right. But not really. In his mind, he was angry with her.
And you're convinced. Yes.
It's always complicated because
Sure it is.
when you're talking about infidelity, there's always anger at yourself too.
Sure.
Like, why couldn't I keep my
Oh,
word?
yeah. Oh, I think he had anger going a lot of directions there. I mean, yeah. He was upset, like Julie said. He was upset he lost a good thing just like that.
Yeah.
He had to do something.
I thought when Joseph didn't say anything, I thought about Jesus when he was in front of his accusers and he opened not his mouth. And I thought, this man, Joseph, is still in the cultural and the slave aspect.
Yes, he is.
He had he might have looked like he had power, but he had no power. He was in a culture where he was dominated by another, and she brought that out.
Mm-hmm.
She said, "This Jew did this."
Yeah.
When you brought it. Yeah.
Well, let me go to another question here, okay? I asked you just a moment ago, as you look at Joseph dealing with Potiphar's wife, do you learn anything? Does it say anything to us about dealing with temptation?
He ran.
Huh?
I guess if you think you're dead, you're lost. And he let his feet do his thinking. He just took off. I think that's
Okay.
the best way to handle a lot of those situations. Because if you stop and think, it's too late. You've already blown.
The final action he took. Now there was a process that led up to this, but the final action he took is he ran.
Yeah, this situation was different than all the other
Yes.
propositions.
Yes, he ran, and he wanted nothing to do with it. And he wanted to get out of there as fast as he could. And, aren't there times when we need to get out of Dodge, when we need to run, especially if we find ourselves in situations, for us, now, that might be very tempting. And I'm not saying this was very tempting to Joseph. I'm saying when we find ourselves, I talk with the youth about this, or all my ministry, I've said, when you're in a situation and you are uncomfortable, and you feel like, if I stay, this is not going to be good, then you get out of there. You just get out of there. Run away. And I use Joseph as an example. You just run. Of course, don't leave your cloak behind.
He had a good relationship with his Lord and with his master, and so I think that helped him to be able to
Yes.
not give it a whole lot of thought and just get out.
Yeah, he just died. That's right. Now, let's go a little further. That was the end result of his actions. What else do you see that helps us?
Well, he was focused on doing the right thing in God's eyes. He had that in mind to begin with.
Yeah. His focus was set. How important that always is for us. And I know I sound like a broken record on so many things, but you cannot replace living day to day in close communion with God, connected to Him. Because when you're connected, your spirit is sensitive to His spirit. And His spirit will let you know when your antennas need to be up. His spirit will let you know when you maybe need to move and get away. Or when you are under attack even from the enemy. His spirit will let you know that. So that's very important. He was at a starting point, which I think if you look back where we've been thus far, from his dad to his brothers, they weren't always connected at all, but Joseph was. Anything else you notice?
Oh, I think it's funny that his cloak caused him so much trouble.
Yeah, that daggone.
That cloak.
If it's not one cloak, it's another, and it gets him in trouble all the time.
Learn to tear away
The first
curtains.
cloak, it convinced his father that he was dead,
Yes, the cloak of many colors, right? And Bill maybe wrapped it up right. He said, you got to wear a tearaway jersey. Except she'd still have that number in her hand. Okay?
Pastor, what does this mean when he says, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house? What does that mean? He does not
What verse is that?
8. Look, my master does not know what is with me.
Okay, in the NIV it says, my master does not concern himself with anything
Oh, okay,
in the
that
house.
makes
Yeah.
more sense.
Because he trusts me.
Okay.
All right?
My scripture there, 10, said, so it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day.
Yes. Yes.
So it had a preliminary.
Oh, it
beginning.
sure did. Every day she was pestering him. Every day.
Potter must have been out of the house a lot.
I know, he was looking for the next meal. Just going to eat somewhere, He was eating out, meeting the buddies, having lunch and dinner, and
He was captain of the guard.
He was he had a job, that's right. Keep us on track, Julie. He was captain of the guard, absolutely.
I think Potiphar was ignoring his wife too.
Well, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Potiphar isn't innocent in this. Why is his wife longing for somebody else? Yeah.
Chances are he was an older fella.
She was a young thing.
What's that got to do with anything? Well, we don't want to get into that kind of conversation, Bill. Let me, and I know we need to move on here, but let me just read something. 2 things to you, okay? And if you want to jot these down and really think about them for yourself. In James 1, verses 13 through 15, this is always a really helpful couple of verses when you think about your own temptations. When tempted, no one should say, this is James, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he's dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. And you know, we could take time and break that down, but it really is pointing out everywhere along the journey, the path of temptation, desire, becoming full-blown sin, everywhere along that path, there are opportunities to stop, to nip it in the bud, to turn the other direction. And all you have to do on your own is think about David and how many times he could have stopped it, how many times he could have nipped it in the bud. And then I think about 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. There's none of us that can say, well, what I'm tempted with is different.
Unique.
It's the same kind of temptation many other people have had to deal with. So you're not by yourself, in other words, which is good news, okay? And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. This is why, when you're tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. That's really good news. Now, let's also be honest with ourselves. There's times we don't want to remember this verse. There's times when the temptation we're faced with is like, forget that verse, because I want to do it, whatever it is. But that doesn't change the truth of 1 Corinthians 10:13, which is, in everything we deal with, there's a way. God has given us a way.
You have to tune in, though.
Yes.
He doesn't hit us upside the head, though.
No.
I think he should.
Well, there's been times I've been clubbed. And I think that's exactly what Kay is saying. You gotta be connected.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to hear it as well, as easily. Okay, well, Joseph got kind of a raw deal coming up here. That's another thing about Joseph. He is one raw deal after another, and he stays faithful.
And God stays
Which
faithful
is-
to him.
That's why he stays faithful. Absolutely. All right.